Welcome back, everyone. So here we go with our next lecture of the semester, and we're going to continue on in the region of Mesopotamia. Real briefly, I always kind of like to start with a little bit of a review. So what we covered last time was, of course, the Neolithic Revolution, how that event helped bring about civilization, all the characteristics of civilization, what makes a civilization. I give you like 6 major characteristics there. And then, of course, the region, Mesopotamia, where it all started. And we talked about the earliest civilizations there in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians, and you had the Akkadians, and then you had the second Sumerian period. And that took us to about 2000 BC. And then the question is, what happened to that second Sumerian period? And the answer is, well, these group of people known as the Babylonians. And so in this lecture, we're going to talk about the Babylonians. And we're also going to talk about the Hittites as well, and I'll explain where they are and who they are as we get to that. So that's kind of what we're doing in this lecture. We're still in the antiquity period, obviously. We're still looking at the earliest of earliest civilizations in the Middle East. And we've got, this kind of groups of people we still need to talk about. Again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the Babylonians or the Hittites, but there's definitely a few things you're going to want to know about them. All right, so let's go to our map. So here's again our map of Mesopotamia. And again, just to remind us, again, the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, obviously very important. And we had talked about how it was in Mesopotamia that you had these Sumerians who had great accomplishments until about 2000 BC. Well, what happened around 2000 BC, or the Babylonians came into power. And the Babylonians will dominate Mesopotamia for hundreds of years after that. Now, the thing is with the Babylonians, I really don't lecture on them, but you do need to know about them. And the reason that the way we're going to learn about them is not by lecturing per se, but by through looking at a primary source. And of course, the primary source that we associate with Babylonia is associated with one very important man, a man named Hammurabi. So again, this is Hammurabi's code. This is the actual code. And Hammurabi, he is going to be the king of the Babylonians, 1792 to 1750 BC. And again, you don't need to memorize dates like this, right? I'm never going to ask you, what years did Hammurabi rule? That's not what we're going to do. You do need to know who he is, why he's important, but I'm never going to ask you specific dates. So just something like that to keep in mind. Just circa dates around. And so Hammurabi, he's going to be important for 2 major reasons. He helps unite all of Mesopotamia under Babylonian rule, and of course, he creates Hammurabi's code. And what you see in this image here is Hammurabi standing up here. One of their gods, it's still a polytheistic god, is giving Hammurabi the law codes. And that's what's all there that you were supposed to read is Hammurabi's code. So you've already had that discussion board on Hammurabi's code. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to give you some of the highlights and what you should have been able to kind of ascertain about the Babylonians from reading Hammurabi's code. And by the way, why is the God giving Hammurabi the code? It sounds familiar, the Ten Commandments, right? What gives more authority to a legal document than to say it's derived from God? If it's just derived from man, well, all men are flawed, right? If it comes from God, it has more weight to it. And so what is in Hammurabi's code? What are some of the ideas that you should have been able to pick up on? So again, I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail because you have the discussion board on it, but there's definitely a few characteristics that you should have understood. So for example, one of the things you should have understood about the Babylonians is that they were very harsh, right? So one is they were very harsh. How do we know they were harsh? Because so many of the codes deal with death. And you should have the law codes that you have available to read there as well. So death, death, death. Everything you do, you steal something, you get put to death. So, we know they're harsh because so many things are death penalty. Second thing you could have talked about in terms of the Babylonians that we know about the Babylonians is they had a class system. How do we know they had a class system? Well, because there's references to slaves in Hammurabi's code. There's references to even different classes and how there are different punishments for people of different classes. In our nation, you don't have the laws don't say you make $1 million a year, you get this punishment. You make $1,000 a year, you get this punishment. The punishments are written the same. Now, granted, if you have more money, better connections, better lawyers, whatever, right? But the law is written the same. In Hammurabi's code, it's such a class system that you have different laws written for people of different classes. Other things we know about the Babylonians. We know what they valued, and we know that agriculture was important to them. How do we know that? Because of a lot of the laws had to do with agriculture. We know about women and men, that it was more patriarchal society, because clearly reading the laws, you saw that men had more rights than women. So we know that about them. We know that they had surgeries, right? Because we know there's codes in there about them performing all sorts of surgeries, like cataract surgeries as well. We know they used metal, because specifically bronze, because there's references to bronze. So that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of codes that I had you read there, and you don't need to memorize all the codes. But what you were supposed to be able to do is read these codes and say, this is what I know about the Babylonians. This is how we can paint a picture of this civilization with one law code. And it shows you how much you can learn about a people from primary sources. And that's why we use a lot of primary sources when we study any sort of history. So that's pretty much it. That's the Code of Hammurabi. That's what you need to know about it. Obviously, there's several other things, and we know they're polytheistic. And so you have other law codes as well that I asked you to read. You have the Hittite law code. You have an Assyrian law code. And the same thing, as you read these law codes, what you're supposed to be able to do is, what do these law codes tell us about these civilizations? All right, so that's it on the Babylonians. They are the ones that displaced the Second Sumerian period, and they will dominate Mesopotamia for hundreds of years. All right, hope all that's clear. And again, there wasn't many specific points to jot down here because we've already kind of covered it in the other discussion board. So now we move on to our next civilization known as the Hittites. So here's some keywords. Get these keywords down. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the Hittites. You have, again, the law code on them as well. But the Hittites are going to dominate another region, not in Mesopotamia, but a nearby region called Asia Minor or Anatolia. So just go ahead and get these last few terms down, and then I'm going to go to a map, and I'll talk about what all these terms mean as we look at the map and tell you what I need you to know about the Hittites. Okay, so again, if you ever get to the keywords, feel free to pause, write them down if I move on. All right, here we go. So here's our map, and the Hittites, I say Asia Minor, Anatolia. It is where we're going to spend a lot of this semester on, which is modern day Turkey. So here it says Anatolia, sometimes it's called Asia Minor. And the Hittites, they begin right over here in this blob of green that you could see on the map here. Now, in terms of the Hittites, other than the law code, there's obviously the law code. You want to know anything in there about them, but I'm going to give you a few other things as well. The Hittites are around for a long time period, and you can see where they're located. They're further north than Mesopotamia. All of this is Mesopotamia. Here you have the Hittites. And at the same time, you also have the ancient Egyptians down here. I actually don't cover ancient Egypt in my History of the Middle East class. I cover that in my Western Civilization class. We will talk about Egypt much more later in the semester, actually, but since Egypt is so often associated with Western civilization, the Greeks have Egypt, the Romans have Egypt, the British have Egypt, it's going to take us a while till we actually get to an independent Egypt to talk about. But do know you have a thriving Egyptian civilization at the same time. There's basically between about 3,000, just to put this up again for you, between about 3,000 and 1,200 BC, there are early civilizations in the Middle East, and in three regions: Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Asia Minor or Anatolia. Those are the three primary areas things are developing. So I talk about obviously Mesopotamia and just a little bit on the Hittites. they are going to be connected with the Egyptians as well, and I'll tell you a story about that as we go through. So what do I want you to know about the Hittites? Well, number one, I want you to know that they were a powerful civilization. They were around for quite a few years. They expand everywhere you see on this map in the green. So all of this region, I'm going to kind of circle it here. So they go from that dark blob of green to becoming much bigger, all of Asia Minor. They move down into a region that you'll definitely want to know the term of called Levant. So they move to the area of the Levant. What is that word Levant? What is that a reference to? Maybe some of you have heard of ISIS. I'm assuming a lot of people have heard of ISIS. And ISIS stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. I don't know if any of you have ever heard it as ISIL. And ISIL is the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. And the Levant area means that ISIS or ISIL, they call themselves something completely different in the Middle East anyways, that their goal is to go beyond Iraq, modern day Iraq, beyond Syria, but all of this region. And when you look at that area of Levant, that's where modern day Israel is and down into parts of Egypt and all of that. Anyways, so that's the region that the Hittites control. We know they're a militaristic society. We know that they had slaves. You have some details in the law codes you need to know about them. But really, the only big story I want you to know is that they will be involved in a pretty big war or battle called the Battle of War of Kadesh. It was one of the key terms that you saw there, and it's located right over here. Now, who are they going to be fighting? It's around the year 1275. The Hittites, again, everything circled here in green is the Hittites. And then you have all of this area that I'm circling is the area of Egypt. And so what you see is right over here, I'm going to erase all this so you can see a little better, they overlap. So what's going to happen is the Egyptian civilization is moving north and the Hittite civilization is moving south. The ancient Egyptians and the Hittites are going to come into a big war called the War or Battle of Kadesh. When they fight this war, most people have heard of ancient Egypt. Very few people have heard of the ancient Hittites. And it's fought during the period of a very powerful Egyptian pharaoh, a man named Ramses II. And they fight this big battle, and at the end, who wins? And the answer is no one. This battle in 1275 between the mighty Egyptians under the rulership of Ramses II, this very powerful ruler who ruled Egypt for like 70 years, and the Hittites is fought to a draw. Neither side wins. So why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because the fact that the Hittites were able to fight the mighty Egyptians during what is called the Egyptian Empire Kingdom, when Egypt was really, really strong, and fight them to a draw, at the very least, that tells us that the Hittites were strong. And that's really the significance of that Battle of Kadesh. The Hittites fight them to a draw. There's a treaty after the battle called the Treaty of Kadesh. And when you look at the details of the Treaty of Kadesh, it gave both sides something. Both sides got some sphere of influence land. Both sides had some rights of commercial trading rights that they worked together. And neither one really won the war. Now, we have sources that by Ramses II, and Ramses II says, I won, I defeated the Hittites. Well, the problem is we also have sources by Ramses II that tell us he personally beheaded his own generals who were involved in that war. And if you stop and you think about it, you wouldn't personally behead a general who just won you a war. So this is why we say it's kind of fought to a draw. So anyways, that's really the only things you need to know about the Hittites. Their location, a couple little quick things I mentioned on them, what's in the law codes, and the Battle of Kadesh. And so as I mentioned before, we have all these early civilizations between about 3000 and 1200 BC. And we don't spend a lot of time on them. The ones in Mesopotamia, the ones in Asia Minor, and then of course you had the Egyptians here. So what happens in 1200 BC? What happens to the Hittites? What happened to the early civilization in Mesopotamia? What happened to the Egyptians? Because in 1200 BC, all of those civilizations disappear at once. And what happens in 1200 BC is a dark age, where everything just goes dark, where there's nothing in the Middle East, where all the characteristics of civilization just disappear. Everything just disappears. That's what we mean by a dark age. A dark age means when the writing stops, political organization stops, use of metal stops, everything stops. And so around 1200 BC, there's this dark age period that lasts for about 100 years. We don't know what happened. There's a group of people known as quote unquote sea people, is one of those terms that I gave you, that sweep into the region and seem to just demolish everything. We don't know where they came from. We don't know where they went. We don't know much about them, but we know that there is this dark age that lasts for about 100 years. What happens in the Middle East after this dark age? Well, let me show you. After this dark age, four new civilizations will develop in the Middle East, and here they are: the Hebrews, the Assyrians, the Neo-Babylonians, and the Persians. You can go ahead and get all this down. We're definitely going to spend a lot of time on this, especially the first and the last. In fact, this is where in my Middle East class, I love this part of the course more, because when I teach Western civilization, if any of you took History 110 at some point with me, I cover all these civilizations as well, but I do them briefly. In this class, we'll spend a lot more time on the Hebrews. We'll spend a little bit more time on the Persians. And we're going to do quite a bit of information on the ancient Hebrews, because again, you cannot understand the modern Middle East if you don't know the story of the Jewish people dating back to, in this case, at least 1100 BC. The Jewish people go further back than that. But to understand the modern Middle East, you need to know this history. So we're going to spend some time on that. We'll talk about the Assyrians, the Neo-Babylonians, the Persians. What you have next to each one are their cities. This is their capitals, where their cities flourished from. I'll show you a map here. So again, if you need to go back and get all those words, but the Hebrews, they're in Jerusalem. The Assyrians are going to be in Nineveh. The Babylonians, the Neo-Babylonians, again down here in Babylon, and the Persians in the city of Persepolis. And this is a much wider map than I've showed you before, but this is good. This is what we're going to be looking at much of the semester. We're just going to be staying in this realm of the world. So that's going to be our next stories. It's the post-Dark Age civilizations. And the one we're going to spend the most time on will be the ancient Hebrews. And we're going to talk a lot about them. It's going to be our next lectures. You're going to know quite a bit about the history of their political history, their cultural history, the contributions they have to Western civilization. Very important civilization. And again, you cannot understand the Middle East today if you don't understand the civilization of the ancient Hebrews, the Jewish people, the Israelites. They're all pretty much the same term for different terms for the same group of people that existed, way thousands of years ago. So that's going to be our next topic. And we're just going to kind of pick up from there, and we'll do a couple lectures on the Hebrews, and then we'll move on to the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Persians. All right, I hope all that's clear. Again, you should really be studying your notes every day. There's going to be a lot of names and people and more events as we move forward. And if anything is ever unclear, again, feel free to kind of reach out, ask me questions. I want to make sure everything's clear for everybody. All right, thank you guys, and we'll move forward. Bye. Have a good day.